Why carbs are not evil. The actual science of metabolism. Today we're going to talk about why carbohydrates are not the villain many people have been told they are. We're going to go beyond simple counting calories or blaming carbs and look at what the modern metabolism research actually tells us. Don't worry, we'll keep this simple. We won't dive into complicated biochemical pathways or memorize enzymes, but if you don't believe me at the end, don't worry. I will go through it and we'll have 4 lectures, 1 hour each in these pathways. But today, instead, we'll focus on the big picture. Nutrition science has evolved dramatically over the years. First, we were told sugar was the enemy. Then it became all carbohydrates. Before that, fat was blamed. Every decade seems to produce a new nutritional villain. The problem is that human metabolism isn't controlled by a single nutrient. Today, scientists understand that the body weight and metabolic health are regulated by multiple organs working together, along with hormones, the brain, genetics, behavior, and the environment. Moving beyond the old one nutrient causes everything mindset is one of the biggest advances in modern nutrition science. Fructose isn't an instant liver toxin. One of the most common claims is that fructose goes straight to the liver where it is immediately converted into fat. Modern research paints a very different picture. Using in vivo isotope tracing, a technique that allows researchers to follow nutrients inside living organisms, scientists discovered that the small intestine is actually the body's first line of defense against fructose. The small intestine acts like a metabolic shield through the enzyme called ketohexokinase, KHK for short. It processes approximately 90% of low to moderate fructose intake, converting much of it into glucose before it ever reaches the liver. Only when fructose intake becomes extremely high, roughly above 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, or 70 to 80 grams at once for most adults, does the intestine begin to reach its processing capacity. At that point, excess fructose spills over into the liver. In other words, fructose is not inherently toxic. Like many nutrients, the dose matters. The intestine is also highly adaptive. When eaten as part of a mixed meal, digestion slows down, giving the intestine more time to metabolize fructose before it reaches the liver. This helps explain why fructose consumed with whole foods behaves differently than extremely large amounts consumed rapidly. We'll also discuss athletes in a future video because exercise changes carbohydrate metabolism in fascinating ways, and anyone that tells you otherwise is completely incorrect. The carbohydrate insulin model doesn't fully explain obesity. Another popular idea is the carbohydrate insulin model. It is called CIM for short. According to this theory, carbohydrates raise insulin, insulin traps fat, inside fat cells the rest of the body becomes starved, hunger increases, metabolism slows, and obesity develops. It's an appealingly simple explanation, and people like it because it's simple, but it's not true. The problem is that decades of carefully controlled human feeding randomized controlled studies have repeatedly failed to support its core prediction. Research shows that fat can be stored even without high carbohydrate intake. Multiple metabolic pathways contribute to fat storage. Lowering carbohydrates does not automatically produce greater fat loss when calories and protein are controlled. Carbohydrates are not uniquely responsible for obesity. Moving on, the brain is the master regulator. A more complete explanation comes from the energy balance model, EBM. Rather than viewing fat tissue as the primary controller of body weight, this model recognizes the brain as the master regulator. Much of this happens below conscious awareness. Your brain constantly integrates signals about hunger, fullness, reward, stress, sleep, physical activity, hormones, food availability, and environmental cues. Modern food environments are filled with highly rewarding, energy dense foods is specifically designed to encourage overeating. Add advertising, social influences, stress, poor sleep, and easy food access, and it's too easy to see why obesity is much more complicated than simple blaming carbohydrates. Cause or effect? This raises some important questions. Do carbohydrates make us store fat? Or do we overeat highly palatable foods leading to excess fat storage? Does storing fat cause overeating? Or does chronic overeating lead to fat storage? Current evidence strongly supports the second explanation. EBM. Energy balance is dynamic. Many people imagine energy balance as a simple equation, calories in minus calories out. In reality, the human body is an open biological system, not a closed mathematical system. Throughout any single day, we're almost always moving between positive and negative energy balance depending on meals, activity, hydration, glycogen, storage, and countless physiological adjustments. True energy balance isn't measured over 24 hours. It emerges as an average over weeks and months. Why the 3,500 rule doesn't seem particularly great to most people? You probably heard that losing 1 pound of fat requires 3,500 calories. While a pound of fat does contain roughly that amount of stored energy, the body doesn't behave like a simple calculator. As we explained above, there's many countless physiological adjustments that change this factor. The truth of it, it is 3,500 calories, but as you lose weight, your basal metabolic rate often decreases. Hormones regulating hunger change, appetite increases, daily motivation decreases. Daily movement often decreases without you even realizing it. That means you lower your knee. Your non exercise activity thermogenesis. The proportion of fat versus muscle you lose also affects metabolism. For example, if your maintenance calories originally were 2,500, but weight loss reduces them to 2,000, continuing to lose weight requires creating a deficit from your new maintenance level, not your old one. Biology constantly adjusts the equation. The three big lessons. Fructose is dose dependent. The small intestine, not the liver, is the primary site of fructose metabolism under normal intake levels. The intestine protects the liver by processing most of the fructose before it ever reaches circulation. Problems arise mainly when intake overwhelms this protective system. But also, as an athlete, there's other changes that occur. In a different episode, we'll talk about that. 2. The brain drives body weight regulation. Obesity is far more accurately understood as a complex interaction between the brain, hormones, environment, behavior, and food availability, not simply carbohydrates trapping fat. Hormones like ghrelin increase hunger, while leptin signals fullness. However, over time, the brain can become less responsive to leptin, making people feel hungry despite having large energy stores. Biology bends mathematics. Calories matter. But biology determines how your body responds to those calories. Hormones, muscle mass, metabolism, sleep, stress, physical activity, adaptive thermogenesis, and countless physiological processes constantly influence how much energy you burn and store. Weight regulation isn't linear, it's dynamic. And you need to understand that and be able to go with that flow as well. What's happening to your body within a week and a month of seeing how your nutrition, your diet, and your activity levels go. Final thoughts. Carbohydrates are not the enemy. Modern metabolism research shows that obesity cannot be explained by a single nutrient, a single hormone, or a single organ. Instead, body weight is regulated by a remarkable complex network involving the gut, liver, brain, hormones, muscles, behavior, and environment. Understanding that complexity does not make nutrition more confusing, it makes it more accurate. In this Next discussion, we will explore how athletes process carbohydrates differently, why fructose can actually become beneficial during exercise, and what the evidence says about designing the ideal diet for long-term health performance, as well as the aging athletes that have high carbohydrate diets still doing 5Ks, 10Ks after their 70s and into their 80s, doing resistance training and everything, and one of the most long lived people in the United States.